Hey there, and welcome to this explainer of our source material. If you're a focused learner trying to master complex topics quickly and effectively, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're tackling something that, let's be honest, strikes fear into the hearts of students and professionals alike. Yep, academic writing. It carries the heavy pressure of grades, the anxiety of missing the mark, and that overwhelming dread of dense formatting rules like APA or MLA. But you know what? It really doesn't have to be this way. We're going to look at a brilliant framework designed by Dr. Mohammad Riyad Ghazali Lubis. We're going to treat writing not as some magical, elusive talent that you either have or you don't, but as a structured, architectural process. Once you actually have the blueprint, the fear completely vanishes. Okay, let's dive into this. So, have you ever felt completely crushed by a blank page? Seriously, we all have. You sit down, the cursor just blinks at you endlessly, and the weight of the entire assignment paralyzes you. There's this really persistent, damaging myth out there that genius writers just sit down at a keyboard, wait for inspiration to magically strike, and pump out a flawless masterpiece on the very first try. But that is entirely fiction. The reality of the drafting process? It's incredibly messy. It's about building a foundation step by step, not conjuring a house out of thin air. Once you understand that literally every great paper started as a disaster of scattered thoughts, that daunting blank page loses all of its power over you. To get us there, we've put together a visual roadmap. We're going to cover demystifying the whole process, the planning phase, drafting your argument, the crucial difference between editing and proofreading, and finally, the final polish. All right, let's jump straight into part 1, demystifying academic writing. To kick things off, we really need to shatter the illusion that writing is just a straight, continuous line from start to finish. If you take a look at the direction of the arrows here, you'll see they actually loop back on themselves. It's a brilliant way to show that the academic writing process is recursive. It's this nonlinear, looping cycle of planning, drafting, and editing. You don't just plan, then draft, then edit in perfectly isolated little silos. Sometimes, when you're right in the middle of a draft, you realize you've got a gap in your evidence, and the arrows send you right back to the planning and research phase. And guess what? This loop isn't a sign of failure. It's exactly how nuanced arguments are built. Mastering this recursive loop is essentially a system for critical thinking and structured communication. In fact, research shows that a staggering 93% of employers prioritize the exact critical thinking skills that this process cultivates. So this is genuinely about setting yourself up for professional success.
Moving right along to the foundational blueprint, let's look at the planning phase.
If you think like an architect, this is exactly where you draw up the blueprints before you even think about pouring a single drop of concrete. This planning phase breaks down into 3 concrete steps. And trust me, you absolutely cannot skip these. Step 1 is analyzing the task. This is where you ensure your work actually answers the prompt. For example, if a prompt asks you to evaluate a historical event, simply describing what happened will absolutely guarantee a bad grade. Analyzing the task prevents you from wasting hours writing beautiful paragraphs about entirely irrelevant information. Step 2 is brainstorming to gather your raw materials. And step 3 is writing the actual plan, which organizes all those materials into a coherent structure. Let's zoom in on that brainstorming step for a second. Mind maps are incredibly powerful tools because they scatter your information across the page in literally all directions. This visual strategy is fantastic for boosting creativity, and it actively crushes that blank page anxiety. Instead of forcing yourself to write complete grammatical sentences right out of the gate, you're just dropping a central theme in the middle and drawing branches out to subtopics. It is highly liberating. It helps your brain find patterns and structure in material that might initially seem totally disconnected. Now, the absolute secret to making this work, as Dr. Lubis points out, is that to brainstorm effectively, you have to turn off your inner critic. You know the one. Your brain will instinctively try to tell you an idea is silly, or that it won't work, or it sounds too informal. Suspend that judgment entirely. Seriously, allow those wild and unusual ideas onto your mind map. Generating ideas without the intense pressure of grammar or perfect structure is exactly how you uncover the real gaps in your knowledge, connect surprising concepts, and eventually develop a truly strong working thesis. Okay, so once you have your thesis, you move on to step 3 of planning, which is writing the outline. And here is a highly practical and maybe slightly surprising rule of thumb for your word count. Allocate it strictly by these percentages: 10% for the introduction, 80% for the body paragraphs, and 10% for the conclusion. It is surprisingly effective. One of the most common reasons writers fail is they write these rambling, bloated introductions that take up like 30% of the paper before they ever actually make a point. This strict mathematical allocation guarantees that you spend the vast majority of your time and space actually proving your argument in the body paragraphs.
All right, blueprint in hand, let's dive into Section 3, drafting your argument.
This is where we finally start framing the house. And we need to make a really strict distinction here. Your first draft and your final draft are two completely different beasts. The first draft is all about momentum. Its one and only job is to capture your initial flow of ideas and focus strictly on content. It is supposed to be rough. It is supposed to be messy. You're just translating your outline into paragraphs. If you stop to fix a comma or agonize over finding the perfect synonym, you will destroy your creative flow. In stark contrast, the final draft is polished, it adheres to strict formatting rules, and it is totally submission ready. Honestly, never try to write a final draft on your very first try.
Now, before you even attempt to turn that messy first draft into a polished final product, you've got to follow this one golden rule. Leave a day or two between drafting and final editing. You need distance. When we write, we suffer from a sort of cognitive blindness. We know what we meant to say, so our brain actually fills in the gaps, even if the words aren't actually there on the page. When you step away and review your paper later with fresh eyes, you'll instantly spot awkward phrasing and massive logical gaps that you were completely blind to when you were deep in the weeds of drafting.
Let's talk about those final stages. Up next, editing versus proofreading.
So you've got your draft, you've rested your eyes, and now it is time for the final inspection phase. People constantly and mistakenly use editing and proofreading interchangeably, but they are very different. Editing is your big picture logistical check. This is where you ask the tough structural questions. Is my argument actually strong? Did I answer all parts of the prompt? Do all my paragraphs actually support my thesis? Is the paragraph order logical, and are there clear transitions between them? Editing is heavy lifting, guys. It might mean deleting entire paragraphs that went off on a tangent or moving whole sections around just to make your argument flow better.
Proofreading, on the other hand, that comes only after editing is fully complete. This is the final polish for surface-level errors. Now you get to obsess over spelling, grammar, and citations. Think about it. If you proofread before you edit, you might spend 20 minutes perfectly formatting the citations of a paragraph that you eventually just delete anyway. What a waste of time. And here is a fascinating technique from the source material for this exact stage. Read your text backwards, sentence by sentence. Sounds crazy, right? But here's why it works. Your brain is incredibly smart at pattern recognition. When you read normally, it'll automatically correct written mistakes in your head. Reading backwards completely breaks that flow and forces you to look at the actual literal words printed on the page.
And that leads us perfectly into our final section, the final polish. I really want to equip you with a practical checklist for that surface-level proofreading stage. We're going to run through some of the most highly relatable, super common surface errors that trip up even the absolute best writers. First up, missing commas after introductory phrases. Second, vague pronoun references. This is when you say something like, the manager took the report from John and put it on his desk. Wait, whose desk? John's or the manager's? You've got to be specific. Third, comma splices. That's when you slam two complete sentences together using just a comma. Fourth, unnecessary shifts in tense. This happens when you start a paragraph talking in the past tense, and then halfway through a thought, you suddenly jump into the present tense. It's incredibly jarring for the reader. And finally, the classic it's versus its confusion. Just remember, it's with an apostrophe is literally always a contraction for it is or it has. If you can't replace it with it is, drop the apostrophe. Now, the absolute crucial tip here is to proofread for only one type of error at a time. Do one pass just looking for commas, and then another completely separate pass just checking citations. Trust me, it is vastly more efficient.
Well, that brings us to the end of our explainer, and I want to leave you with a question to think about. How will you apply this architectural roadmap to conquer your next blank page? As we've seen, academic writing isn't magic. It's a multi-stage recursive method. By analyzing the task, mapping out your wild ideas without any judgment, outlining your word counts, drafting strictly for momentum, and then systematically editing and proofreading, you are entirely in control. You've got the blueprint now. The next time you face a tough assignment or a massive report, use this structured method to build an argument that is just impossible to ignore. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep learning.